I want to turn our direction towards collectors versus curators. We've had a little historical background and art historical curatorial analysis to ask Allison Halsey a question. As collectors who's been passionate about this field for over 3 decades, you have really been at the forefront as there's been a sea change with the rise of women in this field. And like myself, you have traveled to see these exhibitions, most prominently Soaring Voices, that was held at 10 venues in the United States between 2009 and 2013. And you even helped support the English language version of that catalog. So my questions to you is twofold. How important do you think that exhibition was for American collectors and inspiring American collectors, and by collectors I mean both institutional and individuals? And two, how important do you think this exhibition was for the artists themselves who were asked to participate in this exhibition?
Wow, it's a joy to be here. Soaring Voices was really a wonderful celebration of women artists, and in America, it opened our eyes to several generations of artists that we really weren't aware of for the most part. There were a lot of new artists in that show, and younger artists that the American audiences simply hadn't been exposed to. So in terms of the American audience, I think it opened up a lot of eyes to a lot of new work that we hadn't seen before. And American collectors bought a number of pieces out of that show. And I know American collectors contacted you and other gallerists to get work by these artists. And it made a huge difference in terms of our perception of what was available and what was beginning to be developed. It also got a number of museums to think about exhibiting contemporary Japanese ceramics, and they were really happy with the response because the audiences, in many cases, were much larger than they expected. So all of a sudden, museums realized there was an audience for this work. So there was an excitement generated by that audience. So on one hand, it helped sell work, which helped support the artists. And on the other hand, it helped the institutions realize there was a much larger audience for this because it's very accessible work. In Japan, well, the show also went to France, and that was really a feather in everybody's cap. But the show also went to 2 venues in Japan. So it began to give artists more visibility in Japan, one, because it was shown in 2 major venues, but also when a Japanese artist has exposure in the West and press in the West, it really fattens up their resume. And the artists in that show could list all of these exhibitions they'd been in across America, and that gave them more prestige and more recognition. And so in terms of the artists who participated in the show, it gave them more status within the ceramic community and the collecting community in Japan. So people paid more attention to them. So I think that's very important. But what's another thing that's interesting though, if you look at the cover of the catalog, you'll see on the Japanese translation, it doesn't mention the women artists at all. It doesn't talk about contemporary women artists. It says something like delightful work in contemporary clay or something like that. And there's really not that much of a distinction in the culture between women artists and artists. It's something that in America has become important, but is not as pronounced in Japan. And I think it's fascinating that it's not even in the title in the catalog. But there's been a long tradition of women artists in Japan since the war. Before the war, they very seldom were involved. There are only 2 major artists that were actively involved that we were aware of, Chikako and Koyama.
Maybe.
Can you hear me?
I don't, suddenly.
Suddenly you've gone off. The Zoom
We
meeting
can
is
hear
over?
you,
Hear you fine.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Hear you
fine.
Our,
It's
our-
our screen.
Our screen has gone blank. Chikako and Koyama
Mitsuhisa.
Mrs. Koyama, were both really wonderful artists before the war, but their husbands encouraged them to be active in the ceramic world. And it wasn't until after the war when artists had a chance to go to university and study ceramics in university that the world began to open up in a major way for women. So Soaring Voices really documents that whole opening up of the ceramic world to women through the development of education at universities. And I think the two artists today are really a wonderful flowering of that tradition. They're yet again the next generation who have been able to study at university, hone their skills, study with masters. And in fact, today, the predominant number of people in ceramic programs in universities are women. So there's a whole quantum shift in the ceramic world in terms of women becoming a very major power source in the field. So the women today, I think, represent that shift. I love the leaves in terms of, especially the ones that reach out and have an aspirational quality to them, in a sense of seeking to the light and a reaching up. I love the way she branches them up, and there's a sense of aspiration to them that's really quite exciting. And the bags and the wrapped furoshiki, I love it when you can't tell what's inside. I like those much better than the ones where you can tell what the form might be like. But if you can't tell what the form is, then there's a sense of surprise and secret and anticipation. It feels like there's a present waiting for you to unveil. So it's got that history of the wrapped furoshiki, but it also has that sense of color and shape that's much more contemporary. So she's had a wonderful way of bringing history and contemporary feeling and colors together all in one work. So I think both artists have done a wonderful thing, and that is they have developed their own unique voices. And it goes back to what Louise says. Kyoto is a pressure cooker of creativity. And if you can't discover your own voice, you get destroyed. And you have to be strong, and you have to be disciplined and create and speak with your own voice in a very strong way. And both of these women have been able to accomplish that successfully, and we congratulate them.
Yes. That was brilliant, Halsey. Thank you. Really brilliant. Thank you. Louise, correct me if I'm wrong. My recollection is when the title of Soaring Voices needed to be done in 2 languages, the curators of that show, Nishimaya and Hiroko-san, fought very hard with their male director to have the character for woman in the title, and they were refused.
I'm sorry, Joan, I don't know that story.
Yeah. My recollection from Nishi-san was that this was not her choice of title whatsoever.
Interesting. No, it just means fascinating, works that fascinate, but it doesn't specify gender.
Yeah, so it's Japan.
Japan.
Okay, thank you, Norris. I know that was a collaborative effort. Thank you, Alice. Sarah, can we move on to you? As a native New Zealander who has worked and resided in the US for many, many decades and has been so involved with the magic, beauty, and pageantry of the world of opera, please tell us how and when you came to fall in love with Japanese ceramics, and what you personally look for when you wish to acquire one. Do you look at the form, the color, the technique, the surface? Do you gravitate towards function, non-function? And how do you like to use them within your home?
Well, I started off being very interested in ceramics when I was about 16 years old and just going to university in Wellington, New Zealand. And my favorite cousin opened one of the very first ceramic studios with things for sale in Wellington, New Zealand. And at that time, and even now, New Zealand potters were very, very active. People had New Zealand pottery in their homes a lot, both useful and just beautiful to look at. And many, many of the New Zealand potters studied in Japan. So there was a lot of give and take between Japan and New Zealand. And then I moved to San Francisco and continued to collect the odd piece from New Zealand when I could. And then I moved to New York, and I met my husband, who about 25 years ago, who was a great friend of yours. And he had that very beautiful Celadon piece, which is actually in one of the photographs, which I think everyone's looking at, by the flowers. And I fell in love with it. And then I met you, and actually you taught me everything I know about Japanese ceramics, and you also sold me everything that I have practically. But as you can see here, I use them everywhere. I use them very mixed up with sort of rather antique furniture that we have. I have them all over our houses. I've got a small collection of living women photographers, which I feel they work with very well, even though it is so different in feeling. And when I'm actually looking for something, I don't really think of myself as having a collection. I look at things, and I really buy things that appeal very viscerally to me. I need to look around at everything you have an exhibit, or even when I look at things online or something like that, and there's always something that has enormous appeal to me. And usually it's shape, form. Sometimes it makes me amused, some of them that I have. I do like color some of the time, but then I love the very simple white pieces, which are very much like a meditation to look at. So I've got a very wide taste, I would say, in what I like, but I buy only something that I really want to live with. And I get enormous enjoyment out of all the pieces that I've bought over the last 20 years. I just love to be with them and spend time looking at them and thinking about how they were made and the people who made them. So that's really the story of my, quote, collecting.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, could you go back, Tracy? These are some highlights from Sarah's collection, so you can see how eclectic she is, from a Bible by Araki to a beautiful Fujikasa. The lower left-hand corner, you see a work by Hoshino Kayoko, the mother-in-law of Inaba-san, perfectly timed. And actually, yes, everything here is Sarah made by a woman artist. You have Yoshimi at the top, who lives in Paris, Futamura, and Hayashi Kaku at the bottom, who lives outside of Mashiko. Wonderful.